always thought life would finally become peaceful the moment I got admission to study medicine at one of the most expensive universities in the city, because in my head that meant I had survived the hardest part already, years of sleepless nights, scholarship applications, and pretending not to notice how my father sometimes skipped dinner just so I could afford textbooks that were thicker than my entire arm. But life, as I have painfully learned, has a very sarcastic sense of humor. My name is Sam, a fourth-year medical student. When I got into medical school, my father was so proud that he practically told everyone in our neighborhood out of excitement. My dad owns a small roadside clinic, a tiny place with peeling green paint and a signboard that reads Hope Community Medical Center, even though half the time the only thing hopeful about the place is my father's stubborn optimism. The clinic barely makes enough money to cover basic medicine supplies, but when I received my admission letter, my father refused to let money become the reason his son would give up on becoming a doctor. So he did something that, in hindsight, was a terrible idea. He borrowed a huge amount of money. Not from a bank, not from a cooperative society, but from a group of men everyone in the neighborhood simply referred to as the Tigar Claw Gang. They were the most dangerous gang in the city. At that time, my father said it would only be temporary. "Don't worry, Sam," he told me with a confident smile. "Once the clinic expands, I'll pay them back quickly." That plan lasted exactly 6 months. Because shortly after the money was borrowed, our house burned down. And to this day nobody knows how it happened. One night we had a roof over our heads. The next morning we were standing outside staring at ashes and broken walls while neighbors whispered their sympathy. We had to start life from scratch in a new neighborhood, with my father reopening his small clinic beside a dusty roadside. For the past 6 months, not a single dime has been paid. Which unfortunately for me is how I ended up running for my life today. I had just finished a brutal anatomy class where our professor spent 2 straight hours describing the human liver like it was the most romantic organ in existence, and by the time the lecture ended my brain felt like it had been microwaved. All I wanted was to go home, eat something cheap, and collapse on my bed. But the moment I stepped outside the university gate, I noticed them. A group of guys standing across the street. They weren't students. They wore leather jackets in this kind of heat. Cold expressions. The type of men who stare like they're calculating the best way to break your bones. And worst of all, they were staring directly at me. I tried to ignore it at first. Maybe they were waiting for someone else. Maybe they were lost. But then one of them pointed at me. My brain immediately started screaming. So I did what any intelligent fourth-year medical student with excellent survival instincts would do. I panicked and ran. I dashed down the street so fast my backpack started bouncing like it was trying to escape from my shoulders. Behind me I heard heavy footsteps. And one very angry voice shouting, "Stop that kid." Which, in case you're wondering, is a sentence nobody wants to hear while running alone on a quiet street. My lungs started burning after the first 2 blocks. Medical school prepares you for surgery, diagnosis, and complicated Latin terminology, but it does not prepare you for running like a frightened goat through crowded streets while gang members chase you. I turned into another road, almost slipping on a puddle, my glasses sliding down my nose. This is it, I thought. I'm going to die before I even graduate. And imagine the embarrassment. My classmates would attend my funeral and whisper, "He died from gang stress before finishing his residency." I ran around another corner and slammed directly into someone. The impact was so strong I bounced backward like a rubber ball. Before I could fall, a large hand suddenly grabbed my wrist. It was hard and firm. I froze up immediately. Slowly, I looked up and immediately forgot how breathing works. The man standing in front of me was tall. Not just tall, intimidatingly tall. Broad shoulders, dark hair neatly styled to perfection. Sharp eyes that looked calm but dangerous at the same time. And annoyingly, he was ridiculously handsome. The kind of handsome that makes you suspicious. Because nobody should look that good while also looking like they could break a door with their bare hands. He tightened his grip on my wrist slightly. His voice was deep. "Why are you running?" At that exact moment, the footsteps behind me grew louder. My panic returned instantly. I grabbed his arm with both hands like a desperate raccoon. "Please help me," I blurted out. "Some people are chasing me and I swear I didn't steal anything." The man raised one eyebrow. He stared at me silently for a few seconds. And then something strange happened. He looked directly into my eyes. Like he was memorizing my entire existence. For a brief second, the world went quiet. Then suddenly, the gang members caught up to us. 5 of them. Breathing heavily and super angry. The moment they saw the man holding my hand, they stopped completely. One of them straightened his posture immediately. Another lowered his head slightly. And one muttered with visible shock. Boss already caught him. My brain froze. My eyes slowly moved from the gang members, back to the tall man holding my wrist. And in that horrifying moment of realization, my soul quietly left my body. Because the person I had just begged for help was their leader. My brain had officially flatlined. 1 second I was begging a complete stranger for help like a character in a bad action movie, and the next I was staring into the eyes of the very man my father had borrowed money from, the boss himself. Michael Vasper. Even his name sounded expensive and dangerous. The bad guys who had been chasing me shifted uncomfortably, one of them muttering something about the old man's kid before Michael raised a single hand without even looking at them. "Leave," he said, voice low and calm, the kind of tone that didn't need to shout to command obedience. It cut through the night air like a scalpel. His men didn't argue, they just nodded once and melted back into the shadows like they'd practiced this exit 100 times. I watched them go with my mouth slightly open, heart still doing irregular rhythms that would have earned me a spot in the cardiology ward. Michael's fingers stayed wrapped around my wrist, warm and firm, thumb resting right over my racing pulse as if he could read every panicked beat. I tried to pull away but his grip was too tight. "Wait," I stammered, voice cracking like a 13-year-old going through puberty again. "This is a misunderstanding." Michael didn't reply right away. Instead, he started walking, gently but inexorably tugging me along with him toward a sleek black car parked under a flickering streetlight. The vehicle looked like it cost more than my entire university tuition, all dark-tinted windows and silent menace. I stumbled after him, my worn sneakers scraping against the pavement while my backpack bounced awkwardly against my back. Every step felt surreal. Here I was, a nerdy med student who spent most nights memorizing drug interactions, being escorted by a man who probably had more criminal connections than I had credit hours. "Please, you don't have to do this," I protested weakly, trying to sound brave even as my knees threatened to buckle. "I can walk home, it's not far. Or I can take the bus. Buses are very reliable, statistically speaking." He glanced down at me, one corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been amusement, and simply said, "You're coming with me." It wasn't quite a threat, but it definitely wasn't a request either. The words rolled off his tongue with quiet authority, deep and smooth, sending an involuntary shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. I should have been terrified, and I was, mostly, but there was this confusing undercurrent of something else, something warm and fluttery that made my cheeks burn. The car ride was silent except for the low hum of the engine and the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Michael sat beside me in the back seat, still not letting go of my wrist, his long legs stretched out casually while I sat ramrod straight like a patient waiting for bad news. I kept stealing glances at him. The sharp line of his jaw, the way his black coat stretched across his broad shoulders, the faint scent of expensive cologne. We pulled up to a towering building in one of the city's exclusive districts, the kind of place people like me only saw in magazines. The penthouse elevator ride felt eternal. When the doors finally opened directly into his home, I stepped out on shaky legs and nearly forgot how to breathe. The space was luxurious but intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city lights, sleek dark furniture that probably cost a fortune, and an atmosphere that felt both modern and dangerously private. Michael finally released my wrist, but he moved to block the elevator doors before I could even think about bolting. He leaned against the frame, crossing his arms over his chest, and looked at me with those piercing eyes that seemed to see right through me. "Are you aware of the debt your father owes us?" he asked, voice steady, almost conversational. I swallowed hard, standing there in front of him like a defendant in court. "I'm aware, sir," I managed, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "He borrowed the money for my school fees. He didn't want me to miss the opportunity." Our house burned down and everything got harder, but I'm in my final year now. I'll graduate soon, get a good residency, and start paying it back. Please just give us more time. I can work extra shifts at the clinic, tutor other students, anything. Just don't hurt him. Or me. Michael looked at me coldly, obviously tired of my 5-minute blabbing. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a cigarette, and lit it with a smooth flick of a silver lighter. The flame illuminated his face for a moment, highlighting above his eyebrow and the perfect curve of his lips as he took a slow drag. Then he moved closer, stepping into my personal space until I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. My heart rate spiked again and I had to fight the urge to step back, or forward, which was even more terrifying. He exhaled a thin stream of smoke to the side, careful not to blow it directly at me, and tilted his head slightly. 5 days, he said simply, the words hanging heavy in the air between us. You have 5 days to come up with something meaningful toward the debt or else. He let the sentence trail off, but his gaze lingered on my face a beat too long, dropping briefly to my lips before returning to my eyes. 5 days. My mind raced through calculations, tuition refunds, possible loans, selling my barely functional laptop, but all I could focus on was how close he was standing and how my traitorous body was reacting to the danger wrapped in such devastating handsomeness. I opened my mouth to plead again, but the words got stuck somewhere between fear and that confusing, unwelcome spark of attraction. This was going to be the longest 5 days of my life. After that, he signaled on one of his boys to see me off to the gate, where I had to walk all the way home. By the time I burst through the door of our tiny 2-room apartment above the roadside clinic, I was out of breath and sweating like I had just run a marathon. My father was sitting at the wobbly wooden table, stitching up a small cut on a neighbor's hand under the dim yellow light, but the second he looked up and saw my face, his shoulders sagged and the needle paused mid-stitch. "Sam, what happened?" he asked, voice already heavy. I dropped my backpack on the floor and collapsed onto the nearest chair, rubbing my wrist where Michael's grip had left a phantom warmth that refused to fade. "They caught up with me tonight, Dad." The words tumbled out in a long, shaky rush as I recounted everything. The chase, the accidental collision, the way Michael had held my wrist like he owned it, the luxurious penthouse, the cigarette, and those 5 terrifying days he had given us. My father's face crumpled, eyes filling with a kind of quiet sadness that made him look 10 years older in seconds. He set the needle down carefully, wiped his hands on a faded cloth, and just stared at the floor for a long moment. The weight of every decision he had made for my bright future pressing down on both of us. "I'm so sorry, son," he whispered, voice cracking. "I only wanted you to finish school without struggling like I did. Now look at us. Hiding in shadows." We sat there in heavy silence for what felt like hours, the distant hum of night traffic filtering through the thin walls. I tried to comfort him, telling him it wasn't entirely his fault, that we would figure something out, but inside my head the calculations had already started running like an endless loop. I thought about the ways to pay back the money, sell my old textbooks, take on extra tutoring gigs for desperate first-year students, maybe even beg the university for an emergency hardship fund, or worst-case scenario, look for shady part-time jobs that wouldn't interfere with my final rotations. 5 days was a short time to get any reasonable amount of money. I stayed up most of the night making frantic lists on the back of my old lecture notes, my brain refusing to shut off even as exhaustion pulled at me. Day 5 arrived faster than a surprise pop quiz, and by the time the sun rose I was a nervous wreck, heart doing irregular palpitations that no amount of deep breathing could fix. I had a major exam that morning, one of those make-or-break pharmacology papers that could tank my entire GPA if I messed it up, so I forced myself to go to school anyway, clutching my notes like a life raft while my stomach twisted into knots. The hall was filled up as usual, and during the exam I kept glancing at the clock, counting down the hours until Michael would come. When the exam finally ended and I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, I saw a group of students clustered near the main gate, whispering excitedly and throwing glances my way. Some of the girls were giggling behind their hands, eyes wide as they stared at something, or someone, parked just outside the campus boundary. "Who is that guy?" one of them whispered loudly enough for me to hear. "He's insanely hot." My blood ran cold. I pushed through the crowd on shaky legs, ready to apologize profusely the moment I saw him, because the last thing I needed was Michael causing a scene in front of my entire department. He was leaning against the same sleek black car like he owned the whole university, tall and commanding in a dark shirt that hugged his broad shoulders just right, drawing stares from half the campus. Michael looked every bit the intimidating gang leader, yet somehow even more unfairly handsome in daylight. I hurried over, face already burning with embarrassment and fear. "Mr. Michael, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for you to wait here like this. People are staring." Before I could finish the sentence, his hand shot out and closed around my upper arm, firm but not painful, and he dragged me away from the curious eyes toward a more enclosed alley just off the main path, shaded by overgrown trees and far enough from prying ears. My heart hammered against my ribs as he stopped in the dimmer light, finally releasing me but stepping close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. "Bring out the cash," he said simply, voice low and expectant, those dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my knees feel weak all over again. With trembling hands I reached into my backpack and pulled out the small bundle of cash I had scraped together. Every last bit from my savings, a desperate loan from a classmate, and the pitiful tips from helping out at Dad's clinic. I handed it over, the notes feeling pathetically thin in my palm. Michael took the money without a word, flipping through it once with practiced fingers before his expression hardened. "This isn't even 20% of what your father owes me," he stated flatly, the disappointment in his tone cutting sharp. Panic surged through me. "Please," I begged, voice rising in desperation as I stepped closer without thinking. "Just a little more time. I have finals wrapping up soon, I'll get a job right after graduation. I'll work double shifts, sell whatever I have, anything. Don't do anything drastic. I'm begging you." Michael's hand moved suddenly, grabbing the front of my collar in a firm, aggressive grip that yanked me forward until our faces were only inches apart. His breath ghosted across my skin, warm, and his eyes bored straight into mine. The world narrowed to just the two of us in that shaded alley, the distant chatter of students fading into background noise. "I'm going to handle it my own way," he said, each word deliberate and heavy with unspoken promises. Then, just as abruptly, he released my collar, gave me a small smirk and smoothed the fabric with an almost gentle brush of his fingers and turned away. He walked back toward his car without another word, leaving me standing there breathless, collar still warm from his touch, heart racing with a chaotic mix of fear. I watched his sleek black car disappear into traffic. The tall, intimidating gang leader had just declared he would handle things his way. And somehow those words sounded more deadly than an atomic bomb. 2 weeks had crawled by in a strange, almost suspicious kind of quiet that made me wonder if I had somehow slipped into an alternate reality, where gang leaders forgot about debts. I had started to convince myself that Michael had decided to cut me some slack. Maybe he was busy with whatever dangerous empire-building gang bosses did, or perhaps he had simply lost interest in collecting from a broke med student and his roadside clinic father. Life felt deceptively peaceful again. I went to lectures, buried myself in textbooks until my eyes crossed, helped Dad stitch up the usual parade of minor injuries at the clinic in the evenings, and even allowed myself small victories like remembering to eat actual meals instead of surviving on instant noodles and anxiety. The mountain of debt still loomed in the back of my mind, but for those 14 glorious days it had stopped actively trying to crush me, and I was grateful for the breather, even if a tiny, traitorous part of me kept replaying the way Michael had grabbed my collar and stared into my eyes like he could see every frantic heartbeat. That illusion shattered on a humid Thursday evening when I was trudging back from the little grocery shop down the street, plastic bags swinging from both hands loaded with rice, eggs, painkillers for Dad's arthritis, and the cheapest pack of bandages the store had. The sun had already dipped low, painting the narrow alleys in shades of orange and shadow, and I was mentally rehearsing tomorrow's pathology quiz when 3 familiar-looking guys stepped out from behind a parked van. They blocked my path with the casual confidence of people who knew no one would dare challenge them. My stomach did an immediate flip. Hello again, fight or flight response, my old unreliable friend. They were the same ones who had chased me that first night. They had the same hard edges and watchful eyes, the kind that screamed, "We work for someone you really don't want to disappoint." Boss wants to see you, the tallest one said flatly, jerking his head toward a waiting car idling a few meters away. No threats, no raised voices, just a simple command wrapped in quiet menace. I blinked, confusion short-circuiting my brain faster than a blown fuse. I thought he gave me time. I'm still gathering the money. Why was Michael sending for me again so soon? Had the 2 weeks of peace been nothing but a cruel countdown? Part of me wanted to drop the bags and run, but the smarter, more exhausted part remembered how effortlessly Michael had dragged me into that alley and decided that resisting would probably just make things messier. Just shut up and get in the car, the taller guy yelled. I had no other options than to follow like a cat on leash. The ride to Michael's penthouse was shorter than I remembered. Several of Michael's men were scattered around the living area, looking unusually restless. Then I saw him sitting on the edge of a large leather couch, shirtless, with a makeshift bandage wrapped around his left bicep that was already blooming with fresh red. My face became pale as I suddenly felt a wave of sympathy. Who could have done this to him? I asked, but no one responded. His men looked at me like I was some God-sent angel sent to liberate the world. Even from across the room I could tell his wounds needed proper cleaning and stitches before infection set in. Michael's face was tight with pain he was clearly trying to hide, jaw clenched, those sharp eyes still commanding even when narrowed in discomfort. The sight did strange things to my chest. Worry spiked through me like a sudden fever, mixed with that inconvenient rush of attraction at seeing so much of his toned chest on full display. Focus, Sam, I scolded myself. One of the guys, probably the second in command, stepped forward immediately, voice urgent. You're the med kit, right? Boss got jumped earlier tonight. Knife wound? He won't let any of us take him to a hospital. Says too many questions. He told us to bring you here. Said you're going to help sort out his injury. I froze for half a second, grocery bags still dangling forgotten from my fingers. I was a fourth-year medical student who had never treated anything more serious than a sprained ankle in real life outside of supervised rotations. Being summoned like some back-alley miracle worker to patch up the very gang leader who held my family's future in his hands felt dangerous. Michael's gaze lifted to meet mine across the room, steady despite the pain, and there was something almost challenging in it, like he was daring me to refuse, or maybe testing whether I would run screaming or actually step up. My mouth went dry. I don't have my proper kit with me, I stammered. That wound needs irrigation, proper debridement, and sutures. If it's deep it could have hit muscle or worse. Do you at least have clean water, antiseptic, gloves, needle and thread? Anything medical? The words came out in a rushed stream, my nerdy med student brain kicking into gear even as fear and reluctant concern warred inside me. 2 weeks of fragile peace. And now I was standing in a penthouse playing emergency doctor for a man who could ruin my life with a single word. Michael didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched faintly as he watched me set the grocery bags down and roll up my sleeves, his dark eyes following every movement with that same intense focus that made my pulse stutter. Just get to work, Sam, he said, voice rougher than usual. I swallowed hard, heart racing. My hands are about to touch his skin while his men watched like I was on trial. Whatever fragile peace I had enjoyed was officially over. I moved toward him, searching for supplies and trying not to stare too obviously at his chest. The penthouse felt unnaturally quiet as I stood there with my sleeves rolled up, staring at the angry knife wound slicing across Michael's left bicep, while he sat shirtless like some dangerous Greek statue that had decided to bleed all over the furniture. My grocery bags were kept aside after I took a few things out for the cleaning and bandaging. My hands trembled slightly as I accepted the makeshift medical kit one of his men had hurriedly brought. Antiseptic wipes, a bottle of saline, some dubious-looking sutures, gloves, and a pair of scissors. Try not to move too much, I muttered, my voice coming out steadier than I felt as I pulled on the gloves and stepped between Michael's spread knees to get a better angle. Up close, the wound was deeper than I had first thought, clean enough to avoid major vessels, thankfully, but it still needed proper irrigation and careful stitching before infection turned this into a real nightmare. The scent of blood mixed with his cologne hit me harder than expected. I started cleaning the gash with saline, dabbing gently, and Michael didn't flinch, though I caught the subtle tightening of his jaw and the way his breath hitched just once when the antiseptic stung. He looked like he had lost so much blood and might faint anytime soon. I had to come up with something to keep him conscious or face the cruel reality with his men who watched my every move. Did you know that improper wound closure increases the risk of keloid scarring by up to 40%? I blurted out before I could stop myself, nerves turning my mouth into a runaway lecture hall. Not that you'd care about aesthetics, I mean. You already have perfect bone structure. My face burned hot as I realized what had just escaped my lips. Michael's dark eyes flicked up to mine, and for the first time since I arrived, the corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. He didn't laugh, but the low rumble in his chest when he exhaled felt dangerously close to one. "You talk a lot when you're scared, Sam," he said, voice rough from the pain yet still carrying that commanding depth that sent unwelcome sparks racing down my spine. His gaze never left my face as I worked, watching me with an intensity that made the air between us feel thick and charged, like the moment before a defibrillator shock. I had to lean in closer to get the right angle for the first suture, my face now only inches from his, close enough to see his lashes cast shadows on his sharp cheekbones. My heart was hammering so loudly I was convinced he could hear it. Every brush of my gloved fingers against his warm, firm muscle sent confusing signals straight to my brain. Fear, professional focus, and something far more dangerous that had no business existing between a debtor and his creditor. "Keep still," I whispered, more to myself than to him as I carefully placed the stitches, pulling the thread with the precision I had practiced on fake skin pads during skills lab. Michael's breath ghosted across my cheek when he spoke again, low and surprisingly calm. "Why medicine?" I swallowed hard, focusing on the next suture to avoid meeting his eyes directly. "I chose to study medicine because of situations like this," I admitted, the words slipping out quieter than intended. "People get hurt, things break, and I wanted to be the one who could put them back together. Even if my own life keeps falling apart." The confession hung between us, vulnerable and stupidly honest, and for a moment the only sound was the soft snip of scissors as I trimmed the thread. His skin was fever-warm under my fingertips, the hard lines of his bicep flexing slightly whenever I tugged, and I had to fight the urge to let my hands linger longer than strictly necessary. This is not how doctor-patient relationships are supposed to go, my brain screamed. When I finally tied off the last stitch and wrapped a clean bandage around his arm with more care than I probably should have, the tension in the room had shifted into something heavier, more intimate. Michael flexed the arm experimentally, testing the movement, then suddenly reached out with his good hand and caught my wrist again, just like that first night, his thumb pressing lightly over my racing pulse. The touch sent electricity shooting up my arm, and I froze, still standing between his knees, faces close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes under the penthouse lights. "You're good with your hands," he murmured, the words low and rough, carrying a double meaning that made my stomach flip. "I might need you for more than just stitches from now on." My breath caught, a confusing cocktail of fear. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but nothing coherent came out, just a soft, embarrassing stutter. Michael's grip on my wrist didn't tighten, but it didn't release either, holding me there in the charged silence while his men pretended to look somewhere else in the room. The moment Michael's fingers stayed wrapped around my wrist, thumbs still tracing lazy circles over my racing pulse, I knew the night had officially veered off the medical school syllabus. I stood there between his knees in the middle of his luxurious penthouse, gloves still faintly stained with his blood, heart hammering like it was trying to escape my rib cage. He looked at me with those dark, intense eyes. "You're staying with me for at least 3 days," he said suddenly, voice low and final, the kind of tone that didn't leave room for negotiation. "I'm not letting you run off and risk infection just because you have classes or grocery runs." My brain short-circuited for a solid 3 seconds. The same man who had once grabbed my collar in an alley and now had me playing personal surgeon in his living room? "But, my dad," I stammered, the words tumbling out in a nervous rush as I finally found my voice. "He'll be worried sick if I don't come home tonight. I can't just disappear for 3 days without telling him." Michael's expression didn't soften exactly, but something shifted in his gaze, less commanding and more calculated. He released my wrist only to nod toward my backpack lying on the floor. "Call him right here," he said simply, the command wrapped in that dangerously calm voice that sent unwelcome shivers down my spine. "So I know you're not feeding him some story," he concluded. My hands shook as I fished out my phone, Michael's eyes never leaving my face while I dialed the familiar number under the watchful silence of the room. Dad picked up on the second ring, voice already edged with that tired worry I had grown up hearing. "Sam? You okay, son? You're late getting back from the store," he said in his usual worried tone. I barely managed to get 2 sentences out. "Dad, I'm fine, but something came up and I might not be home for a few days." Before I knew it, Michael reached over with his good arm, plucked the phone from my fingers and brought it to his own ear. My stomach dropped straight into my sneakers. "Mr. Thompson," Michael said smoothly, his deep voice carrying across the line with effortless authority, "this is Michael. Your son is safe with me. He won't be coming home for the next 3 days, doctor's orders you could say. In exchange, I'm clearing the entire debt you owe me. Consider it paid in full." He paused just long enough for the words to sink in, then added almost casually, "He'll call you again tomorrow. Good night." And just like that, he ended the call and handed the phone back to me, his fingers brushing mine in a way that felt far too deliberate. I stood there stunned, mouth slightly open, as the reality crashed over me like a surprise drip of pure adrenaline. The debt gone? Just like that? Because I had stitched his arm and now what? I was some kind of collateral he had decided to keep close? Before I could even process the whirlwind of relief, confusion, and that traitorous flutter of something warmer, Michael stood up, tall, shirtless, and still radiating that intimidating presence despite the fresh bandage on his bicep. He motioned for one of his men to bring the car around. "We're not staying here," he told me as his men quickly handed him a clean shirt. We rode the elevator down, his good hand resting lightly but possessively at the small of my back. "I have a private apartment in town. Quieter, just you and me." There was no interruptions. I kept quiet, but my mind was asking a series of questions. The new place turned out to be a sleek, modern apartment tucked away in a quieter part of the city, still luxurious with its floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist dark furniture. The moment the door clicked shut behind us, leaving only the 2 of us in the softly lit living room, the air thickened with something new, something electric that made my nerdy med student brain start running worst-case scenarios and best-case fantasies at the same time. Michael moved closer, his presence filling the room as he shrugged off the light jacket someone had draped over his shoulders earlier, revealing the bandaged arm and the hard lines of his torso that I had spent far too long trying not to stare at while stitching him up. "You don't have to look so terrified, Sam," he murmured, stepping into my space until I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. His good hand came up to tilt my chin gently, forcing me to meet those piercing eyes that now held a heat I hadn't seen before, passionate, hungry, like he had been holding back since the moment I crashed into him that first night. "You saved me tonight," he said as his thumb brushed my lower lip, slow and deliberate, sending sparks straight through me. I felt my face flush hotter than anything else. I swallowed hard, heart doing irregular rhythms again as his body leaned in closer, the growing intention unmistakable in the way his gaze dropped to my mouth and lingered. 3 days, he repeated, voice dropping lower, rougher, almost a promise. 3 days of you right here. And maybe by the end you'll understand exactly how I plan to collect what's between us now. His fingers slid into my hair, tugging just enough to tilt my head back, and the passion in his touch, fierce yet controlled, made it crystal clear that the debt was only the beginning. Michael was no longer just the intimidating gang leader holding my future hostage. He was becoming something far more dangerous, something that made my knees weak and my thoughts scatter like poorly organized lecture notes. "Make yourself feel comfortable," he said as he walked into his room. I sat on the chair, rethinking about everything, wondering why the dangerous gang leader had suddenly taken interest in me. I felt like I should be happy, at least I was having a crush on him and liked him. But the thought of him being a gang leader, the complete red flag any sane person would run from, made it difficult for me to accept that Michael might actually be in love with me. 3 days blurred into something I never expected, intimate, charged, and far too addictive for a nerdy 23-year-old medical student, who was supposed to be focused on finals instead of the dangerously handsome gang leader sharing the apartment with me. Michael's injured arm meant he couldn't risk getting the stitches wet, so on the second evening I found myself standing in the spacious bathroom with a basin of warm water, soft cloths, and a bar of expensive soap, carefully cleaning his body while he sat on the edge of the tub. His shirt was off again, revealing his broad chest and the fresh bandage on his bicep. Every gentle swipe of the cloth across his skin felt electric. My fingers brushed over his shoulders, down his back, tracing scars that told stories I was only beginning to understand. He watched me the whole time with those dark, intense eyes, his good hand occasionally steadying my wrist when I hesitated, the air thick with unspoken tension and a closeness that made my heart race faster than any study session. "You're doing it just right," he murmured once, voice low and rough, sending warmth spreading through me. I tried to keep it professional, reciting anatomy facts in my head like a shield, but the way his muscles shifted under my touch and the quiet gratitude in his gaze made it impossible to ignore how deeply I was falling. That same night, after he insisted I take the bed while he rested on the couch, exhaustion finally pulled me under while I was supposed to be watching over him. I woke briefly to the feeling of something soft and warm being draped over me, his bed covers tucked gently around my shoulders with surprising care. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body, his injured arm resting carefully in his lap. He thought I was fully asleep. His voice dropped into a quiet confession as he spoke more to the darkness than to me. "You're different, Sam," he said softly, the words heavy with something raw. First person in years who showed me genuine kindness without expecting anything in return. He paused, exhaling slowly. "I was 10 when my parents were murdered. Got pulled into the gang right after. Tiger Claw is owned by the man who adopted me. He trained me, turned me into what I am. I've been plotting revenge ever since I got accepted, waiting for the right moment to take down the ones responsible. That knife wound the other night? That was me finally getting my revenge. It's over now. But it didn't pull through the way I would have done if I was still that 10-year-old kid who swore on my parents' grave to cut every limbs of the people who killed my parents. I lay there frozen, eyes closed but heart wide open, hearing every word as he sat close, his presence both protective and vulnerable. The confession wrapped around me like the covers he had tucked in, revealing the man beneath the intimidating leader, the boy who had lost everything and built walls of steel and shadow. Even pretending to sleep, I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, a strange ache mixing with the growing affection I could no longer deny. The next morning, when the 3 days officially ended, something had shifted irreversibly between us. I felt closer to Michael than I had to anyone in my life. His quiet strength, the rare softness he showed only to me, the way he had listened to my rambling medical facts without mocking them. As I stood at the door, backpack slung over my shoulder and the weight of the cleared debt lifting like a healed fracture, I realized with startling clarity that I had fallen in love with him. Not the dangerous gang boss version, but the real Michael who let me clean his wounds and shared his darkest secrets in the quiet hours. "Come to my signing out school party when I graduate," I told him, voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. "Around this time next summer. Keep it in mind." He didn't promise with words, just gave me that intense look and a small nod, his good hand brushing my cheek one last time before I left. Back home, my father was pleased to see me again. He quickly checked for any injuries and asked me so many questions, some which I had no answers to. I told him the debt had been lifted, true to Michael's words, and from now we didn't have to live in fear anymore. My father was happy. He made a delicious meal and encouraged me to study more than ever before. If I was lucky enough, I could get someone to sponsor me through medical school after my finals. As I lay in bed that night, my mind kept thinking about the days I spent with Michael. The way I felt a surge of feelings whenever I cleaned him up, his small smile and his confession that day on the bed. It was obvious that he also has at least an atom of feelings for me too. A year and some months slipped by in a haze and quiet moments where I wondered if Michael had truly stepped out of my life for good. The debt was gone, the threats vanished, but so had any contact. No calls, no sleek black cars waiting outside the clinic, nothing. I told myself it was for the best, that a gang leader and a newly graduated doctor didn't belong in the same story, even as my heart stubbornly refused to forget the feel of his touch or the sound of his voice confessing in the dark. Just when I had convinced myself he had moved on, the day of my signing out party arrived. Campus decorated with lights, music pulsing, classmates laughing in caps and gowns. I was standing near the edge of the crowd, nursing a drink and pretending not to scan the entrance, when a sleek black car pulled up in that effortlessly commanding way I remembered all too well. Michael stepped out, tall and strikingly handsome in a dark tailored shirt, looking every bit the man who had once held my wrist and my future in his hands. My heart leaped so hard. Happiness surged through me like pure oxygen, washing away every doubt in seconds. Without thinking, I pushed through the crowd and threw my arms around him, hugging him tight as if afraid he might disappear again. "I missed you," I whispered against his chest. He smiled as his arms wrapping around my waist to pull me closer, the world fading until it was just us under the party lights. When we finally broke apart, breathless and smiling, he rested his forehead against mine, his voice low and warm in the way that always made my knees weak. I kept my promise. Couldn't miss seeing my doctor graduate. I laughed softly, still holding on to him like he was the best prescription I'd ever filled. "You cleared more than just the debt that night, you know. You cleared space in my life for something real. But disappearing for over a year? That was cruel. I thought you'd decided a med school nerd wasn't worth the trouble." Michael's thumb traced my jaw, his eyes soft with rare vulnerability. "Trouble was never the issue, Sam. You were studying, building your future. I had to give you space so I won't be a distraction." He paused, a small, genuine smile curving his lips. I leaned closer and pecked his cheeks right there, happiness bubbling up inside me. "You're stuck with me now, boss. Doctor's orders. But this time, no more 3-day limits. Deal?" "Deal?" he murmured, pulling me closer as the party music swelled around us. In the months that followed, Michael quietly stepped in to help when the reality of post-graduation hit hard. Residency programs were competitive and expensive, and even with the old debt cleared, the cost of living, textbooks, licensing exams, and the long unpaid hours started weighing on me. One evening, after I had spent hours stressing over application fees and rent, Michael sat me down, took my hands in his, and simply said, "Let me help. You saved my life that night. Let me make sure you get to live yours the way you dreamed." He covered the remaining costs for my advanced training without making it feel like charity, just quiet, steady support from someone who had finally found someone worth protecting. With his help, I was able to focus entirely on becoming the doctor I had always wanted to be. And somewhere between late-night study sessions where he brought me coffee, quiet mornings where he pulled me back into bed with gentle kisses, and the way he looked at me like I was the only safe place in his chaotic world, we finally got together, properly, completely, without debts or secrets standing between us. The lonely, nerdy medical student who once ran from gang leaders had found his home in the arms of the tall, intimidating, strikingly handsome man who had once been his greatest fear and had become his greatest love. Life, it turned out, wasn't peaceful the way I once imagined it. It was messy, dangerous, and unexpectedly perfect. And as Michael pressed a soft kiss to my temple one quiet evening, whispering, "I love you," I knew I wouldn't trade a single heartbeat of it. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more interesting BL stories. Thank you for watching. See you next time.